What is going on, guys? It is Kevin Shields here, and I am about to talk about the glycemic index and glycemic load and why it's important to your blood sugar. Now, before we get into today's video, I need to ask a favor of you. I need you to drop your stigmatisms about carbs or your preconceived beliefs about carbs, because so many times we think about food, or especially carbohydrates, as good foods or bad foods, or foods that you can eat or foods you can't eat. Now, before we even get into that, so I just ask you to leave that at the door, okay? And this is something that I teach my clients. And you'll see up here, I have, why are carbs bad? Okay, I put bad in quotes. So many people think foods are either good or bad, all right? Now, let me tell you, you are not a criminal. Well, I assume you're a good person, but I don't know. You might be a criminal. But anyway, you can't think about these foods as bad, because what happens when you think about bad foods, you end up eating that food, you end up feeling bad about yourself because you know you made a mistake, you feel guilty, which sends you into poor beliefs about yourself, negative self-beliefs about yourself, which ends up doing more harm than it does good in the long run. So before we even get into that, ditch the idea of good carbs, bad carbs, so we can get past this and I can educate you today on what this whole idea behind carbs is really even about, especially when we're talking about prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and balancing your blood sugar. So before we get into it, we're talking about two different things today: glycemic index and glycemic load. Now, you may have heard this term before, the glycemic index. You might not be as familiar with the glycemic load, and that's where it's so important that we talk about both of these, because they're very, very important. Now, before we get into this isn't a science lesson, all right? But I do have a graph here, and I want to show you this and explain this because it's key to understanding. Now, the graph over here, what we have this graph. We have blood glucose, going here, and then we have time running on the bottom, okay? We have an hour and 2 hours. Now, why this is important is because when we eat foods, especially foods that are higher in carbohydrates, so you think your pastas, your bread, your cereals, your sugar, your candy, whatever the carbohydrate is, those carbohydrates get broken down into our body as glucose, okay? Blood glucose or blood sugar. They can be used interchangeably. So what happens is the carbohydrates get broken down, they get absorbed into the small intestine, they get absorbed into the blood, and the blood glucose or the blood sugar levels start to rise, and then they start to come back down. Now, this is a natural response to eating carbohydrates, whether you have diabetes, you have prediabetes, or you don't. You're normal glycemic. This is a normal response to eating carbohydrates. Now, dependent on the foods that you eat, especially the carbohydrates you eat, has a big impact on what happens to your blood sugar, all right? And that is where the glycemic index plays a huge role in understanding. So we have the glycemic index. And what the glycemic index really is, it is a measurement tool that we can use to compare all of our carbohydrate foods to. So the glycemic index tells us how quickly a food will raise our blood sugar, all right? And the scale is on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 being the utmost, the top point, 0 being the lowest. Now, anything above 70 is going to be considered high. Anything between 56 and 69 is medium, and anything below 55 is going to be considered low. Now, foods on the upper end are things like sugar, carrots, white bread, white potatoes. These are candies. These are things that are going to be elevating our blood sugar very rapidly. All right. Now, things on the lower end, things like beans, lentils, vegetables, these things have a lot of fiber. Okay, and fiber helps slow down the absorption. It slows down the rise in blood sugar. So, say for example, this might be lentils or cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. You have, broccoli, and your blood sugar isn't going to spike nearly as much as it would with a candy bar. Okay, simple, but it's really, really important to see this in action. Now, Now that we understand glycemic index and that different foods can have different effects on the rising of blood sugars, we have to look at glycemic load too. Now, glycemic load might not be something that you're familiar with, but it's very, very important, if not more important than the glycemic index. Now, the glycemic index tells us which foods we should prioritize, but the glycemic load tells us how much of the foods have an impact on our blood sugar, okay? So glycemic load, there's an equation that measures, it ranks similar to the glycemic index on its own scale. Now, the equation for glycemic load is you're going to take glycemic index, the food's glycemic index, multiply it by the number of grams of carbohydrates, the net carbs, by the glycemic index, and then divide that by 100. All right. So say, for example, if you take say for example, we have different sections in the glycemic load. Anything above 20 is going to be high. Anything between 11 and 19 is medium, and anything below 10 is going to be low. Now, you're going to need a little bit of math for this to actually see, but fortunately there's a lot of good calculators online. So say, for example, if we take 1 cup of brown rice. Now, brown rice is somewhere in the medium range, probably medium to high. We take 1 cup of brown rice and we multiply that by the number of grams of carbohydrates in 1 cup, and then divide by 100, we come out with a glycemic load of around 18, okay? So it's really important to know that not only is it the food that affects our blood sugar, it's also the amount of food, okay? Because if we were to take 1 grain of brown rice and eat that, that is not going to have a blood sugar spiking effect like a full cup would, all right? 1 grain is going to be a lot different than 4 cups of rice, okay? So really, really important, which is why portion control and portion size is such a key factor in understanding your blood sugar and understanding weight loss and just calories in general. So glycemic load is also really important because if we take something like carrots or watermelon, which are really high on the glycemic index, and we look at the serving size of carrots or watermelon, I'm going to use carrots for example. We look at the serving size of carrots, which is a half of a cup. The glycemic index is really high, but the glycemic load is about a 4, okay? So it's not going to have, 1 carrot or half a cup of carrots isn't going to skyrocket your blood sugar here. Maybe if you eat, cups and cups and cups of carrots, but just a half a cup of carrots isn't going to have this same response, okay? So it's really, really important that we look at this because this breaks away from the stigma of food or nutrition, of foods being good or bad, or can eat this and can't eat this. Now, if you can understand this and you can put this into play, you have yourself a lot more flexibility, and you can have a lot more variety in your nutrition program, which is something that I like to incorporate for my clients, making something that's actually sustainable, that they can stick to in the long run, that helps them balance their blood sugar, that helps them lose weight, and make that body transformation that they're looking to get. Now, we take, again, another one, we take Snickers. Okay, Snickers this is one where it goes high on the glycemic index and glycemic load. Snickers or candy or sugar, it's going to be high up there, all right? A Snickers bar is going to be about 22 on the glycemic load. So that's the type of stuff you want to stay away from. Now, I know you know this. I know that you know that you should be prioritizing broccoli over Snickers and green beans over French fries and baked chicken over fried chicken, or whatever it is, the this or that. But understanding this helps give you a better sense of your nutrition, of how you can make this fit into your life, and ultimately what it can do for your health. So guys, I'm Kevin Shields. I hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed that, and I will catch you next time. Take care.